What's up, everybody? Tonight we're exploring why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Greece. Time to kick off the tale. The morning sun rises over the 7 hills, casting long shadows through the narrow streets of ancient Rome. And as you open your eyes in this strange new world, you would immediately realize that everything you know about survival has just become irrelevant. The very air you breathe would assault your senses with a mixture of wood smoke, human waste, rotting garbage, and the overwhelming stench of thousands upon thousands of people living in close quarters without any concept of modern sanitation. This isn't the gleaming marble city of Hollywood films or history documentaries, but rather a crowded, dangerous, and utterly alien world where your modern sensibilities would mark you as an outsider from the very first moment. You wouldn't even know how to dress yourself properly. The toga, that iconic garment we associate with Roman citizens, wasn't just a piece of cloth you threw over your shoulder. It was a complex arrangement of wool, sometimes up to 20 feet long, that required specific techniques to drape correctly. The way you wore it, the color of the stripe if you had one, the manner in which it fell across your body, all of these things communicated your social status, your occupation, your citizenship status, and even your current activities. Wearing it wrong wouldn't just be a fashion faux pas. It could be seen as an insult to Roman dignity. Perhaps even a crime if you accidentally mimic the dress of a social class to which you didn't belong. And the toga was hot, unbearably hot in the Roman summer, made of heavy wool that would make you sweat profusely. Yet taking it off in public would be unthinkable for a citizen. But let's say you somehow managed to acquire and properly wear appropriate clothing. The moment you opened your mouth to speak, you'd be lost. Latin wasn't just a language. It was a complex system of social communication where the words you chose, the grammatical constructions you used, and even your pronunciation would immediately identify your education level, your social class, and your geographic origin. The Latin you might have learned in school, if you learned any at all, would be the classical literary Latin of Cicero and Caesar. But the average Roman on the street spoke vulgar Latin, a constantly evolving vernacular that varied from neighborhood to neighborhood, from trade to trade. Even if you could speak perfect classical Latin, you'd sound like someone trying to navigate modern New York City speaking only Shakespearean English. The simple act of getting breakfast would become an insurmountable challenge. You couldn't just walk into the ancient equivalent of a cafe and order food. Most Romans didn't eat breakfast at all, and if they did, it was usually just a piece of bread dipped in wine or perhaps some olives. The very concept of 3 meals a day was foreign to them. If you were poor, which statistically you almost certainly would be, you might eat only once a day, and that meal would consist of a grain porridge called poles, perhaps flavored with a bit of garum, that fermented fish sauce that Romans put on everything. The smell of garum alone would probably make you gag. Imagine the most pungent, rotting fish smell you can think of, then multiply it by 10. Romans loved it. They put it on everything from meat to fruit, and refusing it would mark you as suspiciously foreign. Water, something we take for granted with every turn of a tap, would become a constant concern. Yes, Rome had its famous aqueducts, those marvels of engineering that brought fresh water from miles away. But that water wasn't for everyone. If you were wealthy, you might have water piped directly to your home. But for the vast majority of Romans, water meant visiting one of the public fountains, carrying heavy amphora back to your apartment, and hoping the water was actually clean. You couldn't just drink it straight either. Romans knew enough to be suspicious of water quality, which is why they mixed it with wine. But you wouldn't know the proper ratios. wouldn't know which fountains were considered safe, wouldn't understand the social etiquette of waiting your turn at the fountain while maintaining the proper deference to your social superiors. Your modern immune system would be completely unprepared for the bacterial and viral onslaught of ancient Rome. Every surface would be covered in pathogens your body has never encountered. Diseases that have been extinct for centuries would suddenly be active threats. The concept of germs wouldn't exist for another 1500 years, so no one would understand why you were reluctant to share drinking cups, why you hesitated to eat food that had been sitting out in the Roman heat, why you seemed so concerned about washing your hands. And when you inevitably got sick, and you would get sick, the medical treatment available would be more likely to kill you than cure you. Roman medicine involved a combination of prayers, sacrifices, bleeding, purging, and occasionally something that might actually help, but you wouldn't know which was which. The social hierarchy of Rome would be completely incomprehensible to your modern democratic mindset. Every single interaction would be governed by complex rules about who could speak to whom, who had to show deference to whom, who could look whom in the eye. The wrong gesture, the wrong word, even standing in the wrong place could be seen as an insult that demanded satisfaction. And satisfaction in Rome didn't mean a strongly worded letter or a lawsuit. It could mean violence, immediate and brutal violence that was not only tolerated but expected in certain situations. The concept of equality before the law was laughable. A wealthy patrician could have you beaten or killed for the slightest offense, and there would be no recourse, no police to call, no justice system that would take your side against someone of higher social status. Took long showers just for pleasure, never thinking about what a miracle it was to have water that wouldn't kill you. Water that was treated and tested and delivered through infrastructure you never had to think about. Here, water is political, controlled, fought over, and people die from drinking it wrong or not having access to it at all. Your last coherent thought is about a glass of ice water, condensation beating on the outside, the most impossible luxury in this place and time. The end comes slower than you'd expect, your body fighting even when your mind has given up. Millions of years of evolution demanding survival even in impossible circumstances. Your heart stutters but keeps beating. Your lungs pull in air that doesn't provide enough oxygen to your shutting down systems. Your brain fires random neurons, creating hallucinations that merge with reality until you can't tell which is which. You're simultaneously dying on a rocky field outside Athens and sitting in your comfortable modern home, the two realities overlapping and contradicting each other. But let's say, somehow, miraculously, someone finds you before you die. A traveling physician, perhaps, one of the followers of Hippocrates, who actually cares about healing rather than just extracting payment. He gives you water with honey and salt, something close enough to oral rehydration therapy to actually help. He cleans your infected wounds with wine, the alcohol providing some antibacterial action. He gets you into shade, brings down your fever with cool cloths, forces liquids into you until your kidneys start working again. Against all odds, you survive this crisis. You're brought back to health slowly, painfully, with methods that are primitive, but sometimes accidentally effective. The physician is curious about you, this strange person with such unusual features and no comprehensible language. He's traveled widely and knows many dialects, but nothing you say makes sense to him. He decides you must have had your brains addled by the fever, that you're speaking gibberish rather than a foreign language, and treats you with the patience reserved for the mentally impaired. Recovering gives you time to observe the medical practice of the era, and it's a mixture of surprising insight and dangerous superstition. The idea of the four humors dominates, but there's also careful observation of symptoms, detailed case notes, and some herbs that actually have medicinal properties. The physician treats a broken bone with a technique that's not that different from modern practice, setting it straight and immobilizing it with splints. But he also prescribes prayers to Apollo and sacrifices to Asclepius, and seems to believe these are just as important as the physical treatment. You try to learn the language, pointing at objects and listening to their names, slowly building a vocabulary. But ancient Greek is complex, with grammatical structures that don't exist in modern languages, with cultural concepts embedded in the words that you can't grasp without understanding the society. You learn to say water, bread, pain, help, but complex communication remains impossible. You can't explain who you are or where you're from in terms that wouldn't sound like insanity. The physician keeps you as a curiosity, a medical anomaly to study. You're fed and sheltered, but essentially a prisoner, unable to leave because where would you go? How would you survive? You help with simple tasks, grinding herbs, cleaning instruments, holding patients while he treats them. You see infections that will kill without antibiotics, cancers that will grow unchecked, diabetes that will waste bodies away, all the diseases that modern medicine manages, but ancient medicine can only watch destroy people. A pregnant woman comes for help with a difficult labor, and you watch in horror as the physician's limited options play out. He has no way to perform a safe cesarean section, no understanding of antiseptic technique, no tools for dealing with hemorrhage beyond packing with cloth and praying. The woman dies after hours of agony, the baby too, and everyone accepts this as normal, the will of the gods, the price of bringing life into the world. 1 in 4 women die in childbirth here, along with half their babies. Statistics that are just numbers in your history books, but real screaming people in this reality. You want to help, to share your knowledge about germs and sanitation. But how do you explain microscopic organisms to people who have no concept of anything too small to see? How do you describe antibiotics when the basic chemistry won't be understood for 2,000 years? You try to demonstrate hand washing, but without the germ theory of disease to explain why. It just looks like obsessive behavior. The physician tolerates your quirks because you're useful for menial tasks, but he doesn't take your ideas seriously. A plague arrives in the city, something that causes fever and pustules and death within days. It spreads through the crowded streets like wildfire, and the physician works day and night trying to save people with methods that probably spread the disease more than contain it. You recognize patterns of contagion, see how it spreads from person to person, understand that isolation and quarantine would help, but you can't communicate this effectively. You watch hundreds die from something that basic public health measures could have prevented. The physician himself falls ill, and you tend to him as he's tended to others, knowing that nothing you can do will save him. He dies believing he's failed in his duty, not understanding that the tools simply don't exist yet to fight what's killing his patients. His family sells his practice, including you, because you're property attached to the business, and your new owner is less interested in medicine than in profit, selling questionable cures to desperate people. This new master puts you to work preparing fake medicines, grinding chalk and mixing it with wine to sell as healing powder, creating potions from kitchen herbs that do nothing but taste medicinal. You become complicit in fraud because the alternative is punishment or death, and at least these fake medicines aren't actively harmful like some of the real treatments. The bloodletting and purging that legitimate physicians prescribe probably kill more patients than this harmless fraud. You see the social stratification more clearly now. How the wealthy can afford physicians and clean water and decent food, while the poor die from preventable diseases and injuries that become infected. A rich man's broken leg is set and heals. A poor man's broken leg becomes gangrenous and kills him. A wealthy woman has attendance for childbirth and survives. A poor woman gives birth alone and bleeds to death. The inequality isn't just economic, but literally deadly, poverty being a death sentence in ways that modern social safety nets, however imperfect, have largely prevented. Your position in this household is precarious, neither trusted servant nor valuable slave, just a weird foreign creature useful for simple tasks. The other servants avoid you, suspicious of your strange ways and incomprehensible muttering. You've learned enough Greek to understand their conversations, but not enough to participate meaningfully, so you exist in a linguistic twilight, comprehending but not communicating, aware but not involved. The master decides to take you to the Agra to see if anyone recognizes you or wants to buy you, apparently tired of feeding someone who can't properly earn their keep. The market is chaos. Thousands of people buying and selling everything from fish to philosophy. The noise overwhelming after the relative quiet of the household. You see slaves being sold and remember your own experience on that platform. The dehumanization that you now understand is just normal here. Unremarkable. As ordinary as buying bread. A group of young men from wealthy families notices you. Your strange appearance still marking you as different even in rough servant clothes. They're drunk despite it being morning, celebrating some festival or victory, and they decide you'd make amusing entertainment. Your master, seeing the opportunity for profit, negotiates a price for your temporary use. And you're handed over like a rented tool, your personhood completely irrelevant to the transaction. These young aristocrats find your inability to speak properly hilarious, making you attempt tongue twisters and philosophical quotations that you can't possibly pronounce correctly. When mockery gets boring, they move to physical entertainment, making you run while they throw things at you. Seeing how many wine cups you can balance while walking. Typical cruel games that pass for humor among those with too much money and too little empathy. One of them has an idea that you should wrestle, that it would be funny to see the strange barbarian try to fight. You're pushed into a circle with another slave, a man who clearly doesn't want to do this either, but has no choice. The crowd bets on how quickly you'll fall, and when you don't fight aggressively enough, both you and your opponent are beaten until you provide adequate entertainment. You've never been in a real fight in your life. Your modern upbringing teaching conflict resolution through words, not violence. But here words are useless and violence is the primary language. The other slave, understanding the situation better than you, puts on a show of defeating you dramatically, throwing you to the ground in ways that look impressive, but don't actually hurt too much. You understand his mercy and play along, acting more hurt than you are, letting him win decisively so the crowd gets their entertainment and moves on to other amusements. This small kindness from someone in an equally powerless position is the first human moment you've experienced in this nightmare. After the entertainment, you return to your master, bruised and humiliated but alive. He's pleased with the money he made and decides you might be more valuable as rental entertainment than as a household servant. This begins a new phase of your existence, being hired out for parties and gatherings where your strangeness is the attraction, where you're made to attempt various tasks badly for the amusement of drunk aristocrats who find failure hilarious when it's not their own. You become known in certain circles as the idiot barbarian, available for reasonable rates to add novelty to symposiums. Your master profits from your humiliation, And you endure because the alternative is worse. Because at least you're fed, at least you're not being worked to death in mines or fields. At least the abuse is survivable if not dignified. You learn to exaggerate your incompetence, to make your failures theatrical rather than just pathetic, to give them what they want so they'll move on to other entertainments. Through all of this, you're observing, learning, understanding ancient society from the bottom up. You see how the philosophy discussed in those symposiums, the high-minded ideals about virtue and democracy and the good life, exists in the same space as casual cruelty and systematic oppression. The men who debate the nature of justice own slaves they beat without thought. The ones who discuss the importance of moderation drink themselves unconscious nightly. The contradiction doesn't bother them because they don't see it as contradiction. The ideals apply only to people like them, not to the vast majority who exist to support their lifestyle. You think about historical accounts written by these elites, the only voices that survive to your time, and how they present a completely skewed vision of ancient life. The slaves don't write histories, the women don't record their experiences, the poor don't leave monuments. What survives is the perspective of maybe 5% of the population, presenting their exceptional lives as if they were normal, their philosophical leisure as if everyone had time for such pursuits, their democracy as if it included more than a tiny fraction of people. Months pass, maybe a year. Time blurs in the repetition of degradation and survival. Your Greek improves enough that you can understand most of what's said around you, though speaking remains difficult, your accent marking you as foreign no matter how well you construct sentences. You learn the rhythms of ancient life, the religious festivals that punctuate the calendar, the agricultural cycles that determine food availability, the political tensions that occasionally explode into violence. You're rented to a particularly cruel group one night, men who've lost money in some business venture and want someone to take their frustration out on. The entertainment they want isn't amusing failure but genuine pain. And they beat you systematically, professionally, careful not to cause damage that would lower your value, but maximizing suffering within those constraints. You realize this is an art form here, knowing exactly how much abuse a body can take while still remaining functional. Knowledge gained through centuries of slavery. Something breaks in you during that beating, not physically but psychologically. The last vestige of your modern identity, the part that believed this was temporary, that you'd find a way home or at least a way to improve your situation, dies under their fists. You understand finally completely that you will die here, probably soon, certainly badly, and nothing you know or believe or value matters in this world that doesn't recognize you as human. But still your body persists. Still you wake each morning. Still you go through the motions of survival, even when survival has lost meaning. This is what humans do, what they've always done, enduring the unendurable because the alternative is death and biology demands life. You understand now why slaves don't constantly rebel, why oppressed populations tolerate oppression, because the gap between horrible life and death is still a gap most people won't willingly cross. Your master dies suddenly, a stroke or heart attack during dinner, and his estate is divided among his heirs who have no interest in maintaining his odd business ventures. You're sold along with other household goods to a dealer who specializes in problem slaves, the ones who are too broken, too old, too strange to fetch good prices in regular markets. He looks at you with calculating eyes, determining your remaining value in work years, deciding where you might be sold for maximum profit. The dealer sells you to a mining operation, and you know this is effectively a death sentence. The silver mines of Lorien are famous in your historical studies, the foundation of Athenian wealth. But what the histories don't emphasize is that they're worked by slaves who last on average less than a year before dying from exhaustion, accidents, or lead poisoning. The historical significance of these mines is built on thousands of anonymous deaths, including soon yours. The journey to the mines is a forced march in chains, connected to other slaves who've also been designated for this slow execution. Some are criminals, some are prisoners of war, some are just unlucky, but all share the same fate. You understand enough Greek now to hear their stories. The former soldier who was captured in a battle over territory that seemed important at the time, but history won't even remember. The farmer who couldn't pay his debts and was enslaved with his whole family. The woman who killed her master while defending herself and was sentenced to this death. The mines are worse than your worst imagination. Narrow tunnels that flood regularly, drowning whoever's inside. Air that's barely breathable, full of dust and toxic fumes. Temperatures that range from freezing to suffocating, depending on depth and season. The work is breaking rock with primitive tools, hauling ore through passages so tight you have to crawl, all while supervisors beat anyone who slows down. Your soft modern body that never fully adapted to ancient life now faces demands that would break even hardy ancient workers. You last 3 days before your first serious injury, a rock falling from above that crushes your hand. In your time, this would mean surgery, rehabilitation, maybe some permanent loss of function, but basically recovery. Here it means infection is inevitable and amputation likely if you survive that long. The mine operators don't waste resources on medical care for slaves. You either heal on your own or die, and most die. Your crushed hand swells and turns colors that indicate serious damage, and you know you're watching the beginning of your end. Working with one functional hand is nearly impossible, but stopping work means immediate execution, so you continue, using your damaged hand despite the agony, feeling bones grind against each other, watching infections set in as the wound fills with dirt and mine waste. The other slaves help when they can, sharing water, taking some of your load when supervisors aren't watching, showing the solidarity that exists among those who have nothing else. But they can't save you, can barely save themselves. The infection spreads up your arm, red streaks under the skin that you recognize as blood poisoning. Sepsis beginning its systematic shutdown of your body. Your fever returns, worse than before because you're already weakened, and hallucinations mix with the hellish reality of the mine, until you can't distinguish between nightmare and waking. You see antibiotics floating just out of reach, modern hospitals superimposed on mine shafts, doctors speaking ancient Greek telling you there's nothing they can do. You collapse during a shift, unable to pretend anymore that you can work. The supervisor checks if you're faking, kicks you several times, then shrugs and orders your body dragged out and thrown in the pit with the others who've died this week. But you're not dead yet, just dying, conscious enough to know you're being disposed of while still breathing, aware enough to feel the impact when they throw you onto other corpses, alive enough to understand this is how it ends. The pit is a vision of hell that no religious text adequately captures. Bodies in various states of decay, some fresh, some skeletal, some moving slightly because they're not quite dead either, or because they're full of feeding insects. The smell is beyond description, beyond what human senses are meant to process. You lie on this pile of former humanity, feeling rats investigate whether you're ready to eat, knowing that you'll be consumed before you're fully dead, because nature is efficient and calories are precious. But your brain, that marvelous modern brain full of useless knowledge, won't shut down cleanly. It keeps processing, keeps thinking. keeps remembering a world where people don't die like this, where pain can be managed, where human dignity exists as a concept. The contrast between what you knew and where you are creates a cognitive dissonance that's its own form of torture, worse perhaps than the physical pain, because it highlights how unnecessary all this suffering is. How preventable if only the knowledge existed, if only the social structures were different, if only. You think about writing, about leaving some record, some warning to future time travelers, but you can't write ancient Greek. Your crushed hand couldn't hold a stylus anyway, and who would preserve the ravings of a dying slave? Your knowledge, your entire existence in this time, will leave no trace, no impact, nothing to mark that someone from 2,500 years in the future died badly in the past. History will continue exactly as it always did, unchanged by your presence or absence. The last stages of dying are both faster and slower than you expect. Your body shuts down system by system, kidneys first, then liver, then lungs struggling to extract oxygen from blood that's full of toxins your failing organs can't clear. Your heart continues beating long after consciousness fades, that ancient rhythm that connects you to every human who's ever lived, that primal drum that finally stops. But let's imagine, in another timeline, another possibility. Let's say that instead of the mines, you're sold to a household in a smaller town, somewhere rural where life is marginally less brutal. You become an agricultural slave, working fields, tending animals, the kind of work that's hard but survivable if you're lucky. Your body slowly adapts, calluses forming, muscles developing, skin darkening to handle the sun. You learn enough Greek to communicate basically, though your accent always marks you as foreign. Years pass in this alternate timeline, and you survive through combination of luck and adaptation. You never thrive, never become important, never change history, but you exist. You watch seasons change, crops grow, see births and deaths in the household you serve. You develop something like relationships with other slaves, though the constant possibility of being sold makes deep connections dangerous. You learn to find tiny pleasures where they exist, a piece of fruit in season, a cool breeze on a hot day, a moment of rest. But even in this best-case scenario, you're constantly aware of how precarious existence is. A bad harvest means you might not eat. A change in ownership means you could be sold to somewhere worse. An injury or illness without modern medicine could still kill you easily. You live with the constant low-level stress of having no control over your own life, no security, no future beyond the next day's survival. This wears on you psychologically in ways that compound over time. A grinding erosion of self that leaves you hollowed out, existing, but not living. You grow old before your time, body breaking down from labor and inadequate nutrition, untreated injuries accumulating into chronic pain. You develop arthritis, respiratory problems from years of dust and smoke, digestive issues from parasites and poor food. What would be manageable conditions in your time become debilitating here. You can work less, contribute less, and everyone knows what happens to slaves who can't work. One winter, you develop a cough that won't go away. It gets worse despite the herbs and prayers that pass for medicine. You recognize the symptoms, pneumonia probably, or tuberculosis, or any of a dozen respiratory infections that antibiotics would cure, but that here means slow death. You continue working as long as you can, knowing that stopping means being discarded, but eventually you can't anymore, can barely breathe, can't stop coughing blood. They don't throw you out immediately because it's winter and the household has some marginal compassion. or at least doesn't want the inconvenience of disposing of a body in frozen ground. You're allowed to die inside, on straw in a corner of the barn with the animals whose warmth provides some comfort. Other slaves bring you water when they can, share food you can't eat, provide the minimal human connection that makes dying slightly less lonely. You think, as consciousness fades, about all the modern deaths you've been saved from. The appendicitis at 12 that would have killed you here. The infected tooth at 20 that would have spread to your brain. The car accident at 30 where emergency medicine saved your life. Every instance where modern intervention prevented death, all leading to this moment where you're dying anyway, just later, just elsewhere, just from something different. Your last thought is that time travel isn't adventure, it's horror. The past isn't romantic, it's brutal. History isn't progress from darkness to light. It's a charnel house of preventable suffering that humanity slowly, painfully, inadequately crawls away from. You lived in the narrow slice of time and place where human life has value, where suffering is mitigated, where random death is rare, and you didn't appreciate it enough. No one does until they're dying badly in a barn in ancient Greece, understanding finally what humanity has escaped from and how fragile that escape is. The modern world is a miracle of accumulated knowledge and hard-won social progress that creates the illusion of safety and dignity being normal, natural, guaranteed. But they're not. They're recent, fragile, geographically limited achievements that most humans throughout history never experienced. You're dying as most humans have died, badly, painfully, anonymously, without your death mattering to history or barely to anyone present. This is normal. Your modern life was the anomaly. And if somehow, impossibly, you survived even this, lived into old age as a slave in ancient Greece, what then? You'd die eventually anyway, and your death would still be unmourned, unrecorded, unmarked. Your knowledge would die with you. Your impact on history would be zero. You'd have suffered for decades for no purpose, except bare survival that was itself suffering. The best case scenario is still horror by modern standards, still a life no one would choose, still proof that you, modern person reading this, wouldn't last a day in ancient Greece. Because lasting isn't just surviving, it's living with dignity, with purpose, with hope for improvement. None of that exists for most people in the ancient world. They endure because humans endure, but endurance isn't life as you understand it. Your modern psychology, shaped by centuries of individualism and human rights theory, would break under the weight of ancient reality. Your body, protected from birth by modern medicine, would fail against ancient diseases. Your social conditioning, based on equality and justice as ideals if not realities, would crack against the fundamental inequality that structures ancient society. Even if you knew ancient Greek perfectly, understood every custom, had skills that translated to their economy, you still wouldn't last because you're psychologically modern in ways you can't change. You believe suffering should be prevented, that human life has inherent value, that justice should exist, that tomorrow should be better than today. These beliefs are incompatible with ancient reality where suffering is divine will, human value is determined by birth and wealth, justice is power wearing a mask, and tomorrow will be exactly like today for most people. The myths and legends that survive make the ancient world seem heroic, full of adventure and meaning. But myths are what the powerful tell themselves to justify their position. And adventures are what happen to the 1% while everyone else labors to make their adventures possible. For every Odysseus having epic journeys, there are thousands of nameless rowers dying at their oars. For every Plato contemplating truth, there are masses who never learned to read. For every Pericles building democracy, there are the excluded majority who democracy doesn't recognize. You wouldn't last a day in ancient Greece, not because you're weak or cowardly or unprepared, but because ancient Greece wouldn't let you last. The system is designed to consume people like you, people without protection, without status, without the accidents of birth that make survival possible. You're fuel for an engine that creates civilization for the few by destroying the many. Your death, whenever and however it came, would be built into the structure of society, as normal and necessary as the harvest or the tide. And this is just Greece, considered one of the better ancient civilizations, the foundation of Western culture, the birthplace of democracy and philosophy. Imagine being transported to less celebrated ancient societies, to places and times where human sacrifice is normal, where warfare is constant, where slavery is even more brutal, where women have even less value, where children die in even greater numbers. The past is not one horror, but thousands, each with its own special brutalities, its own ways of making human life cheap and painful and short. You think, as you're dying in whatever manner ancient Greece has chosen for you, about everyone who romanticizes the past, who wishes they lived in simpler times, who imagines themselves as heroes in historical adventures. They don't understand that the past is not simple but brutal, that they wouldn't be heroes but victims, that adventure in history means mostly dying badly from preventable causes. The modern world, for all its problems and inequalities and injustices, is paradise compared to the normal state of human existence throughout history. Your death approaches through fever or infection or injury or exhaustion or violence or starvation, or any combination of these very normal ancient endings. Your modern mind that once worried about career advancement and relationship status and entertainment choices now understands what real problems are, what actual survival means, what genuine suffering feels like. But understanding doesn't help, knowledge doesn't save you. Your modern perspectives are just additional torment in a world that doesn't care what you know or believe or feel. The irony is that everything needed to save you exists in your time. Antibiotics for your infections, surgery for your injuries, simple oral rehydration for your dehydration, basic hygiene to prevent disease. These aren't complex technologies requiring massive infrastructure. They're simple interventions based on understanding how bodies actually work. But that understanding doesn't exist yet, won't exist for millennia. And knowing what would save you while being unable to access it is its own special torture that only a time traveler could experience. You die with your head full of useless future knowledge while your body succumbs to ancient ignorance. You die knowing exactly how preventable your death is, while being powerless to prevent it. You die understanding both the miracle of modern medicine and the horror of its absence. You die as a warning to anyone who thinks they're tough enough for the past, smart enough to survive history, special enough to thrive in antiquity. You're not. No modern person is. The past would eat you alive, digest you slowly, excrete you anonymously. This is the truth about ancient Greece that history books don't emphasize, that museums don't display, that classical education doesn't teach. It was a charnel house where most people lived short, painful lives in service to systems that didn't recognize them as human. The philosophy and art and democracy we celebrate were built on foundations of unimaginable suffering, created by elites who had leisure only because masses labored, who could contemplate beauty only because others lived in ugliness, who could discuss justice only because injustice was so profound it was invisible. You wouldn't last a day in ancient Greece, And that's not an insult to your character or capabilities. It's recognition that you're modern in ways you can't fully appreciate until they're stripped away. That you're the product of centuries of accumulated progress that you take for granted. That you're alive only because of technologies and social structures that didn't exist for most of human history. Your inability to survive in the past is proof of how far humanity has come, how much suffering has been prevented, how many problems have been solved. But it's also a warning about how fragile modern civilization is, how easily those advances could be lost, how quickly humanity could slide back into the normal brutality that characterized most of our existence. The ancient Greeks weren't uniquely cruel. They were normally cruel by historical standards. And that normal cruelty is always waiting beneath the thin veneer of modern civilization. Every generation has to choose to maintain and advance the project of reducing suffering, of valuing human life, of creating dignity where none naturally exists. You die in ancient Greece, badly, probably from something preventable, certainly without dignity or meaning or anyone caring. You die as humans have mostly died throughout history, as they still die in too many places, as they'll die again if we forget how recently and incompletely we've escaped from the normal horror of existence. You die proving that the past is not a destination, but a warning, not an adventure, but a catastrophe, not simpler, but more brutal than most modern people can imagine. The last thing you perceive, as consciousness fades in whatever awful manner ancient Greece has chosen for your ending, is that you're dying in one of history's celebrated civilizations, in the birthplace of democracy, in the foundation of Western culture, and it's still unbearable. The past is not divided into good and bad civilizations, into places you'd want to visit and places you'd avoid. It's all horror by modern standards, all brutal for anyone without power, all deadly for anyone without protection. Your modern body, used to clean water and safe food and climate control and medical care, breaks down rapidly under ancient conditions. Your modern mind, shaped by concepts of equality and justice and progress, cannot accept the fundamental inequalities that structure ancient life. Your modern social conditioning, based on individual rights and human dignity, cannot navigate societies where most people are property. You don't just die physically in ancient Greece, you die psychologically, socially, completely. And there's no escape through cleverness or knowledge or determination. You can't invent your way out because you don't have the materials or tools or supporting infrastructure. You can't talk your way out because language and concepts don't translate across millennia. You can't fight your way out because violence here operates by different rules you're not equipped for. You can't even submit your way to safety because submission here means accepting dehumanization your modern mind can't process. The fantasy of time travel always assumes you can remain yourself while experiencing different times, that your modern identity is portable across history. But identity is context-dependent, created by interaction between individual and society. In ancient Greece, you can't be yourself because the self you know doesn't exist yet. Depends on concepts and structures and possibilities that won't be invented for thousands of years. You're not just displaced in time, you're erased as a person, reduced to meat that thinks in ways no one understands or values. Even if by some miracle you lived long in ancient Greece, adapted somewhat, learned the language, found a protected position, you'd still die inside from the constant violence, the casual cruelty, the systematic oppression, the absence of hope for improvement. You'd watch children die from preventable diseases, women die in childbirth, men die from infected wounds. Everyone die from things you know how to prevent, but can't. That knowledge would be poison, making every death a murder by ignorance, every suffering a preventable tragedy. You'd go mad, probably, your modern mind unable to reconcile what you know with what you see, unable to accept the waste of human potential, the pointless suffering, the structural brutality. Madness might be mercy, actually, letting you forget the modern world, forget that things could be different, forget that suffering isn't inevitable. But more likely you'd remain sane enough to suffer fully, to understand exactly how horrible your situation is, to appreciate the full depth of your displacement. Time travel to ancient Greece is an adventure. It's assisted suicide with extended torture. It's voluntary transportation to a death camp where the guards speak Greek and the suffering has classical aesthetic. It's choosing to experience what billions of humans couldn't choose to escape, what they endured because they had no alternative, what they died from because the knowledge to save them didn't exist yet. It's spitting on the graves of everyone who suffered to incrementally improve human existence by voluntarily returning to the conditions they desperately wanted to escape. You wouldn't last a day in ancient Greece, but that day would feel like a lifetime of suffering compressed into hours of realization that everything you take for granted is a recent miracle, that your entire existence depends on achievements you've never appreciated, that the past is a country where everyone dies badly and most die young. That day would teach you more about human progress than any history book, more about gratitude than any philosophy, more about the value of modern life than any meditation on mortality. And when you died, which would be soon and badly, your last thought might be gratitude that no one else from your time has to experience this, that billions of humans can live without ever knowing how horrible normal human existence has been, that the protective bubble of modernity shields most people from the reality of history. Your death would be meaningless to the Greeks, but meaningful as a reminder that the past is not a playground, but a graveyard. Not a destination, but a disaster. Not an escape, but a trap that humanity spent millennia climbing out of. The romance of ancient Greece is a modern luxury available only to people who will never experience its reality. The philosophy seems profound only when you're dying from diseases it can't cure. The democracy seems admirable only when you're not among the vast majority excluded from it. The art seems beautiful only when you're not being worked to death to create the wealth that funds it. The entire classical civilization is a cemetery decorated with poetry, a slaughterhouse with elegant architecture, a torture chamber with philosophical debates in the next room. You lasted less than a day, maybe a few weeks if you were incredibly lucky, possibly a few years if you accept a generous definition of lasting that includes existing in constant suffering and degradation. However long your survival, it wasn't life as you understand the term, wasn't existence with dignity or meaning or hope. It was purely biological persistence in conditions that stripped away everything that makes life worth living by modern standards. Your failure to thrive in ancient Greece isn't personal but structural, not individual but systemic. The system isn't designed for human flourishing, but for exploitation. Not for justice, but for power. Not for progress, but for stasis. You're not failing the system is failing you. As it failed most humans throughout history. As it was designed to fail anyone not born into the narrow categories that mattered. Your death is built into the structure, as planned and predictable as the architecture, as the changing seasons.